Something quietly changed in this war last week, and it wasn't on the battlefield, it was at the podium. The White House rewrote the definition of victory on live television, and almost no one caught it. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, why the most important waterway on Earth is now operating under Iranian control, and why every exit available to the president leads to a different version of the same problem. There's one detail in particular about what Iran actually built while everyone was focused on the bombs. That changes how we understand this entire conflict. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's start with what just happened. On March 30th, the Wall Street Journal reported something remarkable. President Trump told his own aides he is willing to end the war, even if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed. He assessed that forcing it open militarily would push the conflict well past his own deadline. The next day, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood at the podium and listed the war's core objectives: destroying Iran's navy, dismantling its missile and drone infrastructure, weakening its proxies, preventing nuclear capability. But reopening the Strait of Hormuz was not on that list. The waterway that is choking the global economy was quietly removed from the victory checklist. That is a rewrite of the war's justification, and it happened in plain sight. Then, it got more complicated. On March 31st, Trump told reporters the war would wrap up in 2 to 3 weeks. He said the main military objectives could be completed without a wider conflict. Hours later, he posted on Truth Social, telling NATO allies to, quote, build up some delayed courage, go to the strait, and just take it. He called France very unhelpful. He told the world, the United States will not be there to help you anymore. Secretary of State Rubio tried to soften it, insisting the strait would reopen one way or another. But the message was unmistakable. The United States started this war. Iran responded by locking down the most important energy corridor on Earth. And now America is telling the rest of the world, go fix it themselves. Now here's where we need to slow down. Because what most people assume is not what actually took place. Most people picture Iran simply blocking the Strait of Hormuz, the way it has threatened to for decades. A crude shutdown, ships stopped, waterways sealed. That is not what happened. And this is the part most people are missing. What Iran actually built is far more calculated and far more strategically dangerous than a simple blockade. We'll break that down right now. Here is what's actually going on. Before the war began, on February 28th, roughly 100 to 110 vessels passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 20 million barrels of crude, 1/5 of all seaborne oil on the planet. Since the operation launched, that number has collapsed by 95%. Lloyd's List Intelligence recorded just sent 42 total transits between March 1st and March 25th in the same period last year. That number was over 2,600. One full month of wartime traffic barely equals a single peacetime day. But here's the key. Iran didn't just shut the strait down. It converted it into a sovereign checkpoint with a 2-tier geopolitical access system. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps established what the shipping industry is now calling the Tehran Tollbooth. Any vessel wanting passage must submit its full cargo manifest, complete crew list, ownership records, and destination port to IRGC-approved intermediaries. If the IRGC clears the ship, it receives a coded authorization. An IRGC patrol boat then escorts the vessel through a rerouted channel, not the standard lanes, running through the middle of the strait, but a narrow corridor north of Kharg Island, threading between two Iranian islands, running along the Iranian coast. Every ship that uses this route passes through waters Tehran claims as sovereign. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of permanent control. And the access rules are split along geopolitical lines. Vessels flagged to China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan transit for free. Ships tied to the United States, Israel, or their allies either pay roughly $2 million per crossing settled in Chinese yuan, or they do not pass at all. At least 2 vessels have already paid. Now remember that detail I mentioned earlier? The one that changes how we see this? Or it is. Iran's parliament is actively drafting a bill to codify this arrangement into law, not as a wartime emergency measure, as a permanent expression of sovereignty. Lawmaker Mohammad Reza Rezai Kochi told Iranian state media that parliament is pursuing a plan to formally establish Iranian control over the strait while creating a permanent revenue stream through transit fees. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who succeeded his father after Ali Khamenei was killed early in the war, said in his first publicly reported remarks that the leverage of Hormuz should continue to be used. Tehran has also added a new demand to its list of conditions for ending the war, one that was never on the table before: recognition of Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Let those numbers sink in for a moment. At the projected toll rate and normal traffic volume, this system would generate upward of $600 million per month from oil tankers alone, include LNG cargo, and the figure exceeds 800 million. For context, Egypt collects roughly 700 to 800 million monthly from the Suez Canal. Iran is building itself a Suez-level revenue machine from a waterway that, under international law, belongs to no single nation. Now stay with me, because the contradiction between what Trump is saying and what the Pentagon is doing is the most revealing fault line of this entire conflict. While the president talks about leaving, the military is still building combat power in the region. Reuters and the AP have reported additional Marine expeditionary forces moving toward the Middle East. Roughly 2,500 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division deploying into theater, and a third aircraft carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, being sent to support the buildup. That is not the profile of a clean exit. That is the profile of an administration keeping escalation options on the table. 2 carrier strike groups have already rotated through, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, though the Ford pulled out to Split, Croatia, on March 28th after an onboard fire. The Pentagon called non-combat related. Iran-affiliated media immediately claimed a successful strike. CENTCOM denied it. Either way, the Ford is out of the fight. All told, nearly 7,000 additional combat troops are now in the Gulf. That is not a drawdown. That is a buildup. And every military analyst watching knows the most discussed option right now is a seizure of Kharg Island. Kharg sits about 15 miles off Iran's southern coast. It processes approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. Trump told the Financial Times he could take the island. The troop packages make sense for exactly this kind of operation. Marines for amphibious assault, airborne for rapid insertion into contested terrain, special operators for securing nuclear materials, identified by U.S. intelligence as a priority recovery target. But here's the problem. Iran has fired hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones since the war began. Reuters has reported roughly one-third of Iran's missile arsenal is confirmed destroyed. That still leaves significant remaining capacity, and Iran is not sitting still. CNN reported that Iran is fortifying Kharg Island with additional troops, layered air defenses, and physical obstacles. Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, warned publicly that if any regional state supports a landing operation, all of its vital infrastructure will be targeted with, quote, relentless, unceasing attacks. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis called the amphibious option extremely dangerous. The Royal United Services Institute in London assessed it would not be bloodless, and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies warned that holding Kharg under continuous ballistic missile fire from the Iranian mainland just 15 miles away would require a massive defensive footprint that cannot be rapidly assembled. That is not a commando raid. That is an open-ended occupation, and Donald Trump has spent his entire political career promising that the forever wars are over. Now, here's the dimension that is accelerating the urgency faster than any military variable. The economic damage. U.S. gas prices hit a nationwide average of $4.02 on March 31st. That's a jump of more than $1 from the pre-war price of $2.97, a 35% spike in 32 days. Diesel has been even more severe, surging 45% to $5.45 per gallon. And here's what matters about diesel that most people don't think about. Diesel powers every truck, every tractor, every freight train, every construction site in the country. That cost isn't fully at the pump yet. It's in the pipeline. It will land on grocery shelves, shipping invoices, and electricity bills over the next 60 to 90 days. Brent crude settled around $118 per barrel for May delivery. That is a 60% increase since the war began. Goldman Sachs and others have warned that sustained closure of Hormuz could push crude past $150, or even 200 per barrel, a level the world has never experienced. The IEA has described the disruption as unprecedented in scale. Governments responded with a record coordinated release, 400 million barrels from strategic reserves. That bought time, not a solution. The damage now stretches far beyond the pump. Qatar Energy has declared force majeure on some LNG contracts. The Philippines has declared a national energy emergency. Helium supplies have been disrupted. Markets are increasingly pricing in slower growth, stickier inflation, fewer near-term rate cuts. And politically, Trump's position has weakened sharply. Reuters, Ipsos, found his overall approval at 36%. Only 29% approved of his handling of the economy. Just 35% supported the strikes on Iran, while roughly 60% opposed them. About two-thirds of Americans said the United States should end the war quickly, even if it doesn't achieve all of its objectives. House Armed Services Chairman Mike Rogers told reporters there is frustration on both sides of the aisle after classified Pentagon briefings left lawmakers with more questions than answers about troop plans, endgame, and cost. Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick said he is getting his information from press reports, not from the administration. All 435 House seats and 35 Senate seats go to voters in November 2026. And every single day, the pump price stays above $4. Political ground shifts. So where does this go from here? As best as we can assess it, there are three possible roads ahead, and none of them lead somewhere clean. The first option, declare victory and withdraw. Hormuz still under Iranian control. Rubio is already building that narrative. Netanyahu told Newsmax, the war has passed the halfway mark in terms of missions. The language is being shaped to claim success, but if the strait stays closed, the toll regime hardens, gas stays expensive, and critics will frame the entire campaign as the most costly strategic failure in a generation. Second option, hand the problem to allies. London and Paris are reportedly assembling a coalition of up to 35 nations to secure the strait after the fighting stops. With frigates, escorts, and air defense, China and Pakistan have proposed their own 5-point peace plan. But this path exposes an uncomfortable reality. America launched the war and then asked the rest of the world to finish it. The third option, escalate, seize Kharg Island, storm the Iranian littoral, force the strait open. With Marines and airborne infantry under fire, forces are moving into position. The USS Boxer arrives in roughly 2 weeks, giving the U.S. its maximum ground capability. But the Pentagon estimates a Hormuz reopening operation alone take 4 to 6 additional weeks, pushing the war deep into May. U.S. casualties would likely rise. Political fallout would be severe, and Trump would own a ground war in Iran. The exact scenario. He built his entire political identity on opposing. Tomorrow night, April 2nd, Trump addresses the nation on Iran. The White House rescheduled a trip to China for mid-May, which many analysts are reading as a quiet deadline for ending the conflict. The strategic petroleum reserves are running low. Boxer strike group is closing in. The toll regime is hardening into law. Here's where we are. The United States sank most of Iran's navy, struck airfields, missile factories, and nuclear facilities across the country. Over $11 billion spent, more than 8,000 targets struck, 92% of Iran's major warships eliminated. And after all of that, Iran still controls the one thing that matters, the narrow corridor of water between its coastline and Oman, through which 1/5 the world's energy supply is supposed to flow. The war was sold as strength. The exit is being packaged as flexibility. But the strait tells the only story, that markets, allies, and voters will remember who holds Hormuz, holds the leverage. And right now, that is not the United States. Thanks for staying with me through this. I appreciate you taking the time to understand what's really happening. If you found this helpful and clear, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and leave a like. It helps more people find these updates. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the president can find an exit that looks like a victory? Or has this conflict moved beyond anyone's control? I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. Click the video on screen for more, and I'll see you in the next one.